Welcome to EF5 training from the University of Oklahoma's Hydrometeorology and Remote Sensing Group. My name is Race Clark. Thank you for joining us, and let's go ahead and get started with the series of training videos. So, EF5 training, or at least the version that we'll be recording for you, consists of 2 days worth of modules and lessons. The first lesson, the one that you're in right now, is entitled Welcome, and that consists of the goals of the training, the requirements of the computing system needed to complete the training, a description of what EF5 and CREST are, the contents and organization of the training course, an introduction to our sponsors, including the University of Oklahoma, the Hydros Research Group, and the NASA Surveyor Project, as well as instructions for how to install QGIS and TauDEM, which are 2 additional pieces of software needed to use EF5 within the training. On the rest of day 1, you'll also take a look at an introduction to hydrological models, an overview of EF5, the technologies that underlie it, and finally a lesson on digital elevation model derivatives. So let's start off at a really basic point in the training and ask ourselves, what are EF5 and CREST? EF5 stands for the Ensemble Framework for Flash Flood Forecasting, so it's the letter E and then 5 Fs. It's a hydrological model that's scalable to different resolutions, and so that enables EF5 to forecast the entire continuum of floods, from the tiniest raindrops and flash floods all the way out to huge flood waves that take months to develop and eventually affect the world's oceans and tidal zones. EF5 is also not a single hydrological model. It's a framework for hydrological modeling, and so that's where the E in EF5 stands for ensemble comes from. And that's because EF5 allows you to use the same input data and the same parameters and other such settings with multiple model cores in physics, and so that allows you to get an ensemble of results, or different results, from the same input data. CREST stands for Coupled Routing and Excess Storage, and it's a hydrologic model that was developed by NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and OU, the University of Oklahoma. And CREST-like model physics, or the CREST core, are actually one of the options within EF5, and in fact, they're the primary option that we'll be using throughout the training. So it's a multi-model ensemble, and EF5 is expandable, so it's possible to add in new hydrologic model cores, new physics schemes, and those multiple solutions, they can help give you an idea of the possible uncertainty in the forecast. Another way of thinking of this is that EF5 solutions are the envelope that surrounds all possible answers to the question, and in this case, the question is, what will my river do given a certain amount of rainfall and soil moisture? EF5 is user-friendly. We hope you'll discover that throughout the course of the training videos. It's also cross-platform, so while we'll be focusing on the Windows platform during the training videos, you can also use EF5 in Linux and Mac OS X environments. EF5 also supports flexible precipitation inputs natively, and so that includes TRIM, which is a research satellite operated by the US NASA organization. It also supports MRMS, which is a radar-based rainfall estimator from the US National Severe Storms Laboratory, and other legacy rainfall formats like Stage 4, which is used by the US National Weather Service. The goals of the training course are to understand basic hydrological modeling concepts, to be able to locate and process DEM data and create derivatives from those. We also hope to teach you how to diagnose problems in DEMs and to develop a workflow that you can use at home or at work to create your own derivatives. We'll teach you how to locate and process forcing data. In this case, forcing means rainfall or potential evapotranspiration. We'll also teach you how to run EF5, how to learn all the customization options in EF5, and there are a lot of them. That's one of the things that makes EF5 so powerful and so flexible. We'll teach you how to improve model results through understanding what model parameters mean, through evaluating model skill, and also through calibration of the model. And then finally, toward the end of the training, we'll discuss interpretation, analysis, and use of model results. Once you've run the model, what can you do with the results? And there are a lot of things that you can do with the model results, and we'll start to scratch the surface with those throughout the training. And then at the very bottom, that kind of sums up everything that we want to do throughout the training course, and that's to give you the ability to set up, run, calibrate, and use the model totally independently. So what's inside the training course folder? Well, if you obtain this from the web or from one of our in-person training sessions, you'll have a compressed folder, or also known as a zip file, called EF5 Training. And when you unzip that, inside that folder, you'll see 5 subfolders titled Documents, Data, Examples, Presentations, and Software. So the documents contain scientific papers and other checklist or at a glance sort of documents that teach you important concepts about EF5 and hydrological modeling. The data folder contains data that you'll need in order to run the various examples of the training. The examples folder is where you'll actually set up the examples. The presentations folder contains the PowerPoint presentations and PDF documents that are presented in this series of videos. And then the software folder contains self-installing executables for QGIS and TauDEM, which are two pieces of software needed to complete the training, and also EF5 model executable itself. So inside the data folder, you'll have PET, precipitation, hydrosheds, and observations. And the PET data, those are monthly global potential evapotranspiration, or PET for short, from the USGS and USAID FuseNet project. The precipitation folder contains precipitation estimates from TRIM, which is NASA's Tropical Rainfall Measurement Mission. The hydrosheds folder contains hydrological data, maps, and other pieces of information based on space shuttle radar topography. And so those are basically pieces of elevation or topographical data across the Earth's surface. And then the observations folder contains observed stream flow for the various training examples. Inside the documents folder, you have several quick guides and checklists that contain the top 6 skills that we think are important to learn from the training. So once you've gone through all of the training videos and done all of the examples, if you come back to EF5 later and you need a quick refresher, a good place to start would be in the documents folder with those quick guides and checklists. It also contains the EF5 README, which is a much more extensive document detailing all of the exact configuration options for the program. And then it has a series of scientific papers, including those describing the crest physics, the dream calibration method, how precipitation estimates are derived for use within the training, and other examples of crest and EF5 in use. And during this training series of videos, we'll actually look at 2 examples. The first will be on the Wenchu River Basin, which is in the nation of Bhutan, in the Himalayas, South Asia. And then we'll spend a more extensive amount of time on the Bogota River in the nation of Colombia on the north shore of the continent of South America. And just to once again reiterate the outline of presentations, we're in Welcome right now. The next video within the series is the Introduction to Hydrological Models. Then we'll delve more deeply into EF5 itself. And we'll conclude day 1 by talking about DEM derivatives and how to produce those. And then when we come back to day 2, we'll talk about rainfall and PET, or potential evapotranspiration, automatic calibration, and how to use and interpret model output. And at the right-hand side of the slide on the screen right now is actually the outline document that describes more in depth what each of these training modules cover. And then the various pieces of software, we need to thank the folks that make it possible for us to use EF5 within this training. And so all of the developers behind Quantum GIS, or QGIS for short, and also the development team behind TauDEM. Both of those programs are open source and freely available on the web. We've included various self-installing executables within the EF5 training package, but we do want to recognize the contributions of those folks that make EF5 training possible. And then you'll also have 2 versions of the EF5 file itself within your EF5 training folder, one for 32-bit systems and one for 64-bit systems. And those are named with the file names ending in either _32 or _64. And so you want to make sure that you use the version that's appropriate for your operating system. Some of the system requirements. EF5 isn't too picky about what your system is like. It can run on almost anything. We've tested it on Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, Windows 10. It also should at least run on Windows Vista. Anything older than that, it may still work, but there may be unexpected errors, and we don't support EF5 being used on any Windows versions older than Vista. And again, if you're running 32-bit Windows, you'll want to use the 32-bit version of EF5, 64-bit version of EF5 for the 64-bit version of Windows. It would be helpful to have administrator privileges for installing and configuring software. If you run into an issue during the installation process and the computer indicates that it needs administrator privileges, just talk to your system administrator and try to work around that as best you can. For the training, we'd like you to have around 4 gigabytes of disk space. QGIS, once it's totally installed, takes about 1.2 gig on its own. And then there are also some Microsoft dependencies, including the .NET framework, and some other things to take up a few hundred megabytes worth of data. And then when you add in the precipitation data and the example data, the entire training package is around 2 gigabytes or so. It would also be helpful to have Microsoft Excel or access to another spreadsheet program, as we'll be using that throughout the training to make hydrographs to visualize the results we get from the hydrological model. And when it comes to QGIS, you'll also have 2 versions of that self-installing executable. The one that ends in _64.exe is for use on 64-bit systems. The one without that at the end is for use in 32-bit systems. So again, just pick the version that's appropriate for your system. TauDEM will install and run on either 32-bit or 64-bit operating systems. And internet access is desirable, but it's only required for when you're installing TauDEM if you don't already have the Microsoft .NET Framework 3.5. And in fact, you'll see when we reach that point later on in this first welcome module. Just a quick introduction to the folks who are actually bringing you this training today. We're from the University of Oklahoma, which is located in Norman, Oklahoma, which is highlighted in the blue with the black star there in the middle of North America on this slide. OU has nearly 30,000 students, and it's home to something called the National Weather Center, which has about 600 meteorologists and hydrologists, and some of the agencies and offices that are represented in this building include the National Severe Storms Laboratory, the School of Meteorology, the Advanced Radar Research Center, and then finally the sponsors of this training, the Hydrometeorology and Remote Sensing Laboratory, or HYDROS. But we do want to recognize people from NSSL, the School of Meteorology, and the Advanced Radar Research Center because all of them have contributed in various ways to the development and maintenance of EF5, as well as the development, maintenance, and filming of the training. The HYDROS Laboratory specializes in QGIS, which is short for Quantitative Precipitation Estimates, hydrological modeling, which is what we're going to be talking about throughout this training, and then something called the FLASH project, or Flood Locations and Simulated Hydrographs. HYDROS consists of 5 scientists, 9 postdocs, 15 graduate students, and several dozen alumni. And we have people from all over the world that collaborate and work with us on a daily basis. And so that's one of the things that helped prompt the idea of bringing this training virtually to anyone who wants to download it worldwide. Our other sponsor is NASA Surveyor, which is a joint venture between NASA and the United States Agency for International Development. They work with satellite-based observation data. They work with helping developing nations make better environmental decisions based on remotely sensed data from NASA and other agencies. And they have centers throughout the world. They're headquartered in the United States, in Huntsville, Alabama, but they also have nodes in Panama, Kenya, Nepal, and they're consistently discussing ways of expanding Surveyor's reach even farther across the globe. And some of the natural disasters that they're interested in include floods, fires, droughts, and frost. And this training will mainly focus on floods. We'll have a brief discussion of droughts, and we won't tackle fires or frost too much. So let's go ahead and start the QGIS installation. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with the QGIS installation process now. Our first step on slide 17 of Module 1 is going to be to move the EF5 training folder to your desktop. So EF5 training, you'll either have obtained it from our website or from an in-person training on a flash drive. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my flash drive, which is drive E, named Grace Clark here. And you see I have this one file called EF5 training, and it's a compressed file or a .zip file. And I'm just going to drag that over to my desktop. And it'll take just a second or two to copy. And once it copies, I'm going to do something really important. And that really important thing is I'm going to actually unzip or uncompress the folder. So you want to make sure that you're working with an unzipped version of the EF5 training folder. And the way I do that is by right-clicking and going to extract all, or if you have 7-zip or WinRAR or another program installed, it may be called something different. But you want to go ahead and unzip, and I'm going to unzip it to desktop//EF5 training and click extract. And this will take another couple of moments. And the reason why it's unzipping so many files is we have all of the data that's zipped up in there so that we're able to run the various examples within the training, as well as all of the PowerPoints and the other materials that are there to try to help make the whole hydrological modeling process easier to understand. And while we wait for this to unzip, I'll show you what happens if you don't successfully unzip something. When you don't have it unzipped, everything looks okay, but you'll see this pink area at the top that says Compressed Folder Tools. If it says that, you're not clicking on the right file. You want to click on the one that doesn't have the zipper, the one that's open and has little pieces of paper inside it. When I click on this one, I don't see any pink up here at the top of the window. And just so I don't get confused, I'm going to go ahead and delete the version that has the zipper on it so that I don't get confused at all. So now all I have left is this folder, EF5 training. It doesn't have anything that says compressed folder up at the top. I go ahead and open up the folder, and inside I see data, documents, examples, presentations, software, and welcome. So welcome is the presentation that we're looking at right now. And we want to install QGIS. So we're going to go to software. And inside software, you should have 5 files. There are 2 for EF5, 2 for QGIS, and 1 for TauDEM. I'm doing this presentation on a 64-bit system, so I'm going to pick the QGIS that says x86_64 at the end. If you're on a 32-bit system, you'll pick the other one. So I'm going to pick the one that's appropriate for me, and I'm going to double-click. And then Windows is going to pop up and ask me if I really want to let this program make any changes to the computer. And so I trust myself, so I'm going to say yes. And then the setup wizard comes up. So you can click next on the first screen. And then on the second screen, you'll click I agree. That's just a license agreement. It'll ask you where you want to install the program. So I'm just going to keep the default location. So I'll just click next. And I'm not going to worry about checking any of these boxes. These are just sample data sets for QGIS that you can install if you want, but we don't need them for the training. So I'll click install. And a bunch of stuff is going to happen on the screen, which tells us that QGIS is starting to install. Depending on the speed of your computer and what version of Windows you're running, what type of hard drive you have, this process may take 2 or 3 minutes. And when it does, you'll click finish. And so our QGIS install is just now wrapping up. And as it does, you'll start to see some new icons appear on my desktop. The first one is called grass, and appropriately it looks like a stem of grass. Then I have MSys, Saga GIS, QGIS Desktop, QGIS Browser, and the OSGeo 4W shell. So over here in my setup wizard, it now says that everything has been installed, so I'm going to click finish. And that gets rid of the wizard. And now I'm going to open up QGIS Desktop 2.6.1. And since this is the first time we're loading QGIS, it's going to be friendly and it's going to show us some QGIS tips. So I'm just going to tell it I've had enough tips and I don't need to see any more. I'm going to go ahead and open up my QGIS window fully here. And this is a good sign that everything has installed properly. So you want to make sure that you're getting to this window. Now, once we're inside QGIS, we're going to actually make some changes to the configuration of the program. So the first thing we're going to do is go to the processing menu up at the top of the window, and we're going to select Toolbox, which is the first option. And now you'll see something has appeared over on the right-hand side of the screen called the Processing Toolbox. I'm going to go down to the bottom of that, so in the very bottom right of the screen, and I'm going to click Simplified Interface, and I'm going to change it to Advanced Interface. And when I do, now you see I have a whole bunch more options in my processing toolbox. And then I'm going to navigate to processing again up in the top menu bar. And this time I'm going to go to options, which is the 4th item down. I'm going to go to providers. I click the plus sign. And then I have this little red T down toward the bottom, or really it's a tau. And that stands for TauDEM, hydrologic analysis. So I'm going to open that little part up. The first option says activate, so I'm going to click the checkbox. And then after I click that checkbox, I'm going to click OK. And now you'll see that I have TauDEM appearing as an option over in the processing toolbox. So we've made a good first start, but we're not quite finished yet. We actually now need to install TauDEM and make sure that it's all functioning properly. So for now, I'm just going to minimize QGIS. I'm still here in my software folder. This time I'm going to double click on TauDEM 512. So Windows is going to pop up and ask me if I really want to make this change, and I'm going to say yes. So it's going to tell me initially that it's checking for the Visual C++ redistributable runtimes, and then the Microsoft HPC CAC, and blah, blah, blah. These are just things that TauDEM needs to run. So we're going to click OK, and then it's going to ask if we want to install the libraries required. So we'll say Setup. Process is going to start. I'm going to tell it I agree with the license terms. Down here at the bottom, you can send information to Microsoft if you want. You don't have to. I'm not going to. And then click Install. And unlike QGIS, this one is pretty fast. So it says, OK, Visual C++ has been installed. Click Finish. Now it's going to try to install the HPC CAC. So I'll click Next. Accept the terms in the license. Go ahead and keep the default location. Click Install to begin the installation. It'll say Finished. Now it says it wants the .NET Framework 3.5. Most of you taking this training will probably already have this, and so you won't see this step. This is a new installation of Windows, though, so I'm going to need to install it. So Microsoft is very friendly to me, and it's going to give me a website to go to. And then about halfway down the page, I'm going to look for .NET Framework 3.5 SP1. I'm going to click yes. And then there's this big red button that says download. So this is the part where you'll need an internet connection if you don't already have this piece of software. But again, most people probably have this. I'm going to go ahead and click here to make sure it really installs. And then down at the bottom, it's going to ask me if I want to run or save the file, so I'm going to say run. And then at the window, you say download and install this feature. And it tells us the following feature was successfully installed. So I'm going to click close, and I'm going to exit my browser window. And if you have to go through that step, what you want to do is reopen TauDEM 5.12. And we're just going to check to make sure it installed correctly. So we click OK, we click Setup. And now I get this wizard. For those of you that didn't have to do the .NET step, you'll do this immediately. It'll ask you where you want to install it. So I'm going to just keep the default location. And then I'm going to click Next at Confirm Installation. And since TauDEM is a fairly small program, it's very quick to install, and then it tells us TauDEM 5.1 has been successfully installed, and we'll click Close to exit. So now we've installed QGIS and TauDEM. So now we need to go back to QGIS and make sure that we've actually done the configuration process appropriately. So I'm going to go through slides 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. And then on 28, you see the end of the instructions for making sure that TauDEM is successfully installed. Now we return to QGIS, and from the processing menu at the top of the screen, we select Options. We're going to go to Providers, and then TauDEM, just like we did before. So you can see we've already checked the box beside Activate. Now we're going to click in the blank area out to the right of MPIC to OpenMPI. And I'm going to double click, and when I do, it turns into a text box. And if I go over to the side, I see 3 little dots. And when I click that, it brings up a nice folder for me to look at. So I'm going to go to Local Disk, or whatever your C drive is named. Then I'm going to go to Program Files, and Microsoft HPC Pack, and then bin, which is short for binary. And inside there, I will right-click, click Copy, and then click Cancel, and then I'm going to paste that directory into that box. And then when I click outside that box, now it's saved that directory right there. I'm going to do the same thing for the TauDEM Command Line Tools folder. I'm going to go to Local Disk, Program Files. This time I'm going to go to TauDEM, and then TauDEM 5 EXE. And inside here, I'm going to click up at the top, right-click, Copy, Cancel, and then I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to click somewhere else in this box, and now you see both of the directories have been saved inside this dialog box. So I'm going to click OK. And now we're going to test it. We're going to see if our configuration process worked. So now up at the top left, I'm going to go to the Layer menu, Add Layer, which is the second item, and then Add Raster Layer. If you prefer the keyboard, you can use Control-Shift-R for this. And when I click that, I get a window that pops up. I'm going to go to my desktop. And when I go to my desktop, you see EF5 training. So I'm going to go inside there, then to Data, and then from there into HydroSheds. And you'll see I have this file called test_DEM, and I'm going to open that file. And you should see something like this appear on your screen. And when this does, you're going to go over to the processing toolbox. You're going to open up TauDEM, and under Basic Grid Analysis Tools, you're going to use Pit Remove. And when you double click that, this pops up. And what we're going to do is see if Pit Remove actually worked or not. So, out toward the edge of Pit Remove Elevation Grid, you can click, and it'll either let you save to a temporary file or save to file. So just to test everything, we're going to go to Save to File. And I'm going to navigate to my user and then to my desktop, EF5 training. And then inside data and HydroSheds, where I already have test.dem.tif, I'm going to write fixed.dem.tif and click save. And it appears in that window at the bottom. And then I'm going to click run. And when you first run TauDEM, you'll get a warning about Windows Firewall. And that's just because it's the first time it's using this HPI or this MPI process manager. So you can either click allow access or cancel. But in any event, it's successfully completed. And now over in the left-hand side of the window, I have two things. One called the pit moved elevation grid and one called test.dem. And so if you were able to run this successfully and you now have a pit removed elevation grid over on the left-hand side of the window, that means that TauDEM was installed successfully and you've completed everything you need to complete the first module. If you had some sort of issue, you should probably try rerunning the QGIS or TauDEM installer one more time, and be sure to rewatch the video and check for all of the file paths and everything. Usually if something goes wrong, it has to do with the processing menu, the options area, and then inside TauDEM, these two file paths. So you just have to make sure that these actually point to the areas where these things were installed. In our experience of doing the training in person, these are basically the top two things that go along with the installation process. So that completes the QGIS install. If you were curious why we're using QGIS and TauDEM, it's because QGIS is flexible. There are thousands of people across the world that are developing new plugins and new ways of using it every day. It runs on almost every operating system you can think of. It's also open source and free, which is extremely important to us. If you're familiar with ArcMap and ArcGIS, those tools can do the same thing. The problem is that they can run into the $100s or even thousands of dollars a year for each computer you use, whereas QGIS and TauDEM are totally free. And so that's why we choose to use them for EF5 training. So the next module is going to be an introduction to hydrological models. That will be inside your EF5 training presentations directory. If you want to learn more about installing QGIS and TauDEM, you can search for either of those products online and search for instructions there, or you can reference the documents folder of EF5 training where we have a checklist for the installation process in a document in there. So thanks for watching the first video, and we hope you'll continue on with this.